Goosebumps The Vanishing is now out. We got season 1 a while back ago. I'm sure most people either skipped on it or forgot about it, but now we have Goosebumps The Vanishing. And was it better than season 1? Well, let's talk about it. Now my thoughts for season 1 just real fast. I enjoyed season 1. I do wish it was more like the original series, having each episode a book. I do wish they remade that original series instead of having the episodes 20 minutes long. It was instead 40. I wish season 1 was more like that, but for the plot that they did have, I enjoyed the slappy concept. I enjoyed the connecting the world concept. And the season 2 was greenlit, so I was interested to see where they would go next. So, with that being said, let's talk about season 2. It doesn't hold up to season 1. Now for starters, I like the new cast of characters. Now I do not think they're as good as the original cast of characters that we got in season 1. I do wish they continued that story on, but they didn't. We got a new set of characters instead. And these new characters are a fun add. They basically have all the charm that you liked about the original characters from season 1, but just newer. Now, can feel repetitive because of that, but not a big problem. They introduced each character in their own way. Each character has their journey that they go on. Each character has their book that their story is going to be based on. And I just enjoyed the new cast of characters. Now, the show has some great horror moments. Most of it is interrupted by some comedy thrown in here, but when it does come to the horror moments, I feel like they were able to capture the spooky feel of it. Not too much that the comedy completely overrides that, but before the comedy starts, right after a jump scare, it does a good job at building the suspense throughout it. Nothing in here that's absolutely terrifying and like a horror movie, but it does do a good job at keeping that spooky horror-like feel. The show also has its heartfelt moments. I'm about to dive into a whole bunch of problems, but I can say that the show is able to satisfy you with the ending and still have its heartfelt moments that the entire show was building up to. So when those heartfelt moments hit, you feel it. And if you enjoyed season 1, you most likely are going to enjoy this season 2. It brought most elements over that season 1 had. Kind of had this whole new story. But I enjoyed season 1 and I didn't like this. Now I'm about to dive into a whole bunch of problems with the show. Now I could go in depth and break down each episode and go by scene from scene, explaining every problem that I have with the scene, especially towards the end of the show. I have a lot of problems like that, but we'll be here all night in that case. So, let's just talk briefly. My big problem here is that this doesn't feel like Goosebumps. Throughout the entire show, it feels like an entire new story. Like they had a story for our idea, but they didn't know how to market it to have people watch the show. So they figured just to slap the Goosebumps title onto the project. That is what this show feels like. It feels like they just added the Goosebumps words onto the show. They called this show Goosebumps just for people to watch the show. That's what this show feels like. Like when it actually comes down to the Goosebumps books in here, like Monster Blood, Stay Out of the Basement. Stay Out of the Basement is touched on briefly, but it's nothing like the original novel. Monster Blood is not Monster Blood. It's nothing like the original novel at all. If the title of the episode wasn't Monster Blood, I would have no idea what the episode was, because Monster Blood was barely in the episode. Now we do have stuff like the haunted car I did like, Boy Who Cried Monster, but those are really the only 2 episodes that actually were somewhat like the novel. They were still almost completely different from their adaptation. When it comes to other episodes like Camp Nightmare, there's no camp. I can't spoil anything, but it's not a camp, I can tell you that right now, and it has nothing to do with a camp or a nightmare. Like I said, it just feels like the story writers wanted a way to market this movie, so they made it a Goosebumps Season 2. And you can feel that while watching the show that some of these Goosebumps elements don't really fit into the main story that the story is trying to tell, which makes me think that this wasn't really meant to be a Goosebumps type show. Which is why it's confusing to me. Why not remake the original show? Everyone who is watching the show would rather see it remade from the original series, so why don't you just do that? Why don't you just listen to your audience and remake the original series? Everyone is asking for it. Let's just do it. Now the tone is all over the place for this show. Some moments, like I mentioned before, you kind of have this horror-like feel to the show, but then right after that it's interrupted by a joke. Now there was one joke I laughed at. It was a pretty good joke, but like other jokes kind of just interrupt the show and don't really make sense in the context of it. Some moments you have a great jump scare, other moments you have some stupid joke, and other moments they're in the same scene together, so the tone is completely all over the place in here. And another thing, by the end of the show, once we learn what is actually happening in the story, I won't spoil anything, but once we actually learn what is happening and learn certain plot points are revealed, it feels nothing like Goosebumps. That's what I said before. This doesn't feel like a Goosebumps show. And just the reveal of the main story of what is actually happening has nothing to tie in with anything. At least season 1 had Slappy, it tied into Goosebumps. This one came out of absolutely nowhere. It has no connection to Camp Nightmare, Monster Blood, the haunted cars, out of the basement. There's nothing in here that's connected to any of that. And like I said, it just feels like it's called Goosebumps just to market the show. And the writing in here. The writing is extremely frustrating because it doesn't really seem like it knows its audience. But I'll get to that in a second. Some of the writing in here, like for the romance in here, the episode before, you have these two characters falling in love. The episode after that, one person wants to split up with the other person. Then they want to get back together again. So it's kind of like all over the place like this. This is not really how romances work, especially if it's all in a 24-hour period of each other. So this writing like that is pretty poor in here. But my main problem with the writing is that it doesn't really know its audience. Who are you making this show for? I'm so confused because there's some jokes in here, some writing in here that's aimed for the age level for reading the Goosebumps books. But then there's other stuff in here that's aimed for the other people who grew up on Goosebumps on here. But just the way to balance out the writing and the humor doesn't really mix those two together. So you're left with half the show following the age group of Goosebumps, humor type writing, and then you have the other half of the show following the people who grew up on Goosebumps type writing. There's also some jokes in here that neither groups will understand. It is for someone completely out of those age groups who's not even watching the show. I'm just extremely confused on who this show is meant for. Is it for Goosebumps fans or not? Overall, Goosebumps The Vanishing is not a great follow-up to that first season. It doesn't really know its audience, and it's just marketing the show as a Goosebumps property when the actual show itself almost has nothing Goosebumps related. There's a few episodes, but even those few episodes have nothing to do with their adaptation, and just the main story of the show, and by the time it wraps up in the end, didn't connect to anything Goosebumps related. And the poor writing after that definitely didn't really help his case. Now, is this show watchable? Yes, this show is watchable. You can enjoy it. Expect the tone and who the show is made for to be all over the place. If you like this video, maybe these ones on the side will interest you too. Like, subscribe, and see you guys next time. Goodbye.